If you're a vegetable gardener in the late spring and early summer, you might notice something strange start happening to some of your spring vegetable plants. If you notice that there's a really kind of thick stem that forms and produces flowers, there's a very good chance that your vegetable plant is bolting. Now, I'm going to share today what bolting is, how to prevent it, everything you need to know. But what I'll start with saying is that bolting can be really frustrating. For me, it mostly happens in the late spring, early summer, and it's caused by the warming temperatures. But there's nothing worse than spending all spring growing vegetables and watering them and fertilizing them, only for them to then bolt and be pretty much unusable. So, I'm going to share information with you today to help you learn more about bolting, what you can do to prevent it so that hopefully you can avoid it in your garden. So, first of all, what is bolting? So, for vegetable plants, from a biological perspective, the purpose of that plant is to reproduce and create more plants. And so, when those plants feel like they're at risk of dying off, they are going to do what they need to do to be able to create more plants. And that is where the bolting comes in. So, when it sends up that large stalk with flowers, those flowers then turn into seeds, and then they'll obviously fall into the soil and be able to continue that life cycle of that plant. And so, bolting happens when that plant feels any kind of stress. And there's a lot of different things that could make it feel stressed. It could be a lack of water, it could be the length of daylight if it's getting shorter or getting longer, it can be not enough nutrients. But in my experience, the most common cause for bolting in a vegetable garden is heat. And so this is going to happen for those spring cool season crops as it gets into summer and gets warm. Those spring cool season crops do so well in the spring because they need cooler temperatures. And so as it gets into the summer, they get stressed, they think they're going to die, and so they end up bolting. So, what plants are more likely to bolt? For me, the first vegetables to bolt when it turns hot is usually lettuce and spinach. So, just a little more fragile and can't handle that heat very well. But then also, what I'll have bolt is going to be things like cauliflower, broccoli, cabbages, a lot of those root vegetables, radishes, beets, carrots. Cilantro will bolt somewhat quickly, arugula, onions, leeks. So, like I said, it's going to be more of those cool spring season vegetables. So, what's the impact on the vegetable plants when they bolt? Well, for your leafy greens, what's going to happen is those are going to become more bitter. So, the taste is not going to be very good. Some people might not mind a bitter taste, but I think a lot of us would prefer your leafy greens not to be super bitter. So, that's one way that it changes the plant. And then for other plants like your root vegetables and then things like broccoli and cauliflower, it's going to change the texture of it. So carrots, instead of being really crisp, they're going to get kind of woody and just not taste as good as you want them to. And so it really just changes the taste and the texture of those vegetable plants to the point where you might not want to eat it anymore. How can you prevent bolting? Well, there's a few different strategies that you could use. One is to make sure that you're planting those cool season vegetable plants at the right time. So here in Missouri, I'm in zone 6B. I'm going to plant out early to mid March. If you're trying to plant lettuce in like early to mid May, it's going to bolt pretty quickly. At least here where I live, it starts getting hot towards mid to late May. And so those temperatures are going to be too warm for a lot of those cool season vegetables. So you want to make sure that you're planting in the right season. And you want to know what zone you're in and be able to see when your last frost date is to be able to determine when you want to, at the latest, plant out those cool season vegetables. So plant it at the right time. Another thing you can do is make sure that you are watering enough and using a good quality mulch on the top of either your containers or your raised beds, or if you're planting in the ground, just a layer of some kind of mulch to help keep those roots cooler. That's going to help make it so that they're not getting too overheated once it starts warming up. You can also choose bolt resistant varieties. So some varieties will be labeled as that. So that's a good option as well. I haven't seen a lot of those, to be honest. So I don't use that tactic, but you certainly could try that. Now, if you start to see a plant forming those flowers and it's really early on, it hasn't really shot up yet, because you'll start to notice like it'll kind of start happening at the base of it. You'll see those flowers forming. It'll look different than anything else that's growing on that plant. What you could do is you could pinch those flowers off. This is going to be a temporary fix. So your timeline on that plant starts getting limited once you start to see those flowers. But if you pinch it off, that's going to give you a little bit more time. I would recommend harvesting though within like a few days or a week to go ahead and get that plant up so that the taste and the texture doesn't get affected and then you can still eat it. But once you start to see things bolting, for example, this year I was growing some bok choy and I had three different plants in a row. And I noticed that one of them had started to bolt. And what that said to me, since they were all in the same area, was that those other two plants were at risk of bolting. And so I went ahead and harvested all three of those. So if you start to see certain plants bolting, know that the other similar plants in your garden are going to be at risk for that. So just be conscious of it and harvest things a little more quickly if you're going to be in that situation. So, what can you do if a plant starts to bolt? Well, like I said, if you catch it early enough, you can pinch off the flowers for a temporary fix and go ahead and get things harvested as soon as you can. Another option is to go ahead and let it flower and leave it in your garden. Those flowers are really good for pollinators and they're going to attract those pollinators to your garden, which is very important because there's a lot of vegetable plants that need pollinators to be able to grow fruit. Things like tomatoes, peppers, peas, green beans, cucumbers, anything that grows a flower where then the fruit will form, you need pollinators. So you could leave the flowers if you have room and there's nothing else you need to get planted. You could also let it completely go to seed and then save those seeds for the next growing season. The other option is probably the one that's the most difficult, which is to just go ahead and compost it or throw the plant out. And like I said, this is really a bummer because to grow a plant all season and then not even be able to harvest and eat it, it just I hate doing that. But sometimes it happens and so you just have to end up getting rid of the plant and you just learn for the next growing season. So that's everything I've come to learn about bolting in my 7 years as a container vegetable gardener. Like I said, it can happen in any season, but for me, it's most common in that late spring. And it's just an opportunity to learn and do better next time. So I hope that you found this helpful and I hope that you have a great growing season this year.